Hey everyone, the battle for free speech continues. Another CBC article today, campus clash. Students battle over what constitutes free speech. So I'm glad at least there is a battle, right? So at least it means people are willing to stand up in opposition to these people that keep trying to silence opposing voices and silence anyone that steps outside of their particular collective or their ideology. Some students say they are discriminated against for their unpopular or controversial opinions. So even those two words alone, unpopular, controversial, well, depending on the type of people you are around, you surround yourself with, that's open and up in the air and open to interpretation and completely subjective on its own. Kevin Areola never thought of himself as an advocate for free speech, but then he found himself waging a court battle over it. This really opened my eyes and made me realize that all speech should be protected, says the Ryerson University political science student who started the Men's Issues Awareness Society. Today, it's me that can't talk about men's issues and men's mental health. Tomorrow it might be another group. Yeah, first they came for, right? Yeah, silence is free speech, just like Jordan Peterson said. Violence or submission are your own alternatives if you silence speech. Speech is how we deal with each other. You silence speech and people's ability to debate or discuss topics, even vigorously, even in heated type elements, even with some anger involved. Well, without them, it's either complete submission and conformity or violence, and neither one is acceptable. Yeah, all speech should be protected. Women actually make up most of the group, which is confined to meeting in a tiny room that's more like a closet because the student union refused to give that group official status, saying it was anti-feminist and would make female students feel unsafe. These are in the universities that's supposed to open up and expand the minds of the youth in Canada. Think about that. With the rise in trigger warnings and safe spaces on campuses, where some students say their unpopular, sometimes controversial ideas are being silenced because of what they call political correctness, others say free speech is being used to justify sexist, racist, and anti-LGBTQ views. But the political correctness, that's cultural Marxism, postmodernism. Pay attention to Dr. Jordan Peterson's videos on the postmodernist aspect of it. But for cultural Marxism, just do a Google search and you'll find out that's been touched down and dealt with extensively for a long time. So there's a lot of literature, a lot of information, books, a lot of info out there for you to learn if you want to understand what they're talking about. This is all ideologically driven. Political, yes, but it's all about forced collectivism and forced subjugation. Areola says his group is not anti-feminist or sexist. I kind of came to the university thinking that it was a place where people could freely exchange ideas, push boundaries, he said. But really, it's just the padded room where everybody's trying to control a message under the guise of making everyone safe, which is BS, honestly. Yeah, no shit there. The student union did not respond to queries from CBC News. So, of course, they want to silence everyone else's free speech, and if they're called out for what they do, they won't even own up to it. Like I said, these are cowards. These are control freaks and cowards, very authoritarian, but because they know they're in the wrong, they don't want anybody to challenge their ideas or the ideology. If they had their way, these people, if they had the ability, they would do a lot more than what they're doing now to try to silence or squish free speech. You can guarantee that. A lot of these people, when you think about whether it's back in old world Russia, the communist regime, or Hitler or Mussolini, a lot of these people would have been following out these orders, being mindlessly indoctrinated slaves and serfs to the ruling class, thinking that they were doing it for the greater good. Like I say, these are dangerous people. Don't let the fact they act as if they're benevolent, don't let them fool you or deceive you in that manner. A similar battle is raging at the University of Alberta. Student Amber Lee Nichol says security didn't act when protesters disrupted her anti-abortion group's information display in 2015. When she tried to schedule another event the following year, the administration wanted her to cough up $17,500 in security fees, right? Jeez. I feel like that amounted to censorship, she said. If you put a price tag on free speech by saying the more controversial you are, the more you have to pay for security fees, that immediately shuts down discourse for people who are either too unpopular or too poor to have their voices heard on campuses. Right on. The administration told CBC News that all campus groups have to pay for the cost of security if they hold an event where things could blow up. But you know that wouldn't happen. All you'd have to do is look through the history and see how many people that or groups had to have security. And you'll see that it's very lopsided, very one-sided. If you're all about promoting the collective, right, or government, or pro-state is bullshit, you won't have any of that concerns. Or any of those concerns at all. That's what happened in Berkeley, California. In February, when protests against the scheduled talk by far-right commentator Milo Yiannopoulos devolved into riots, and the event was ultimately canceled. Some call it mob censorship, and it happens at Canadian schools too. Yeah. Student protesters pulled the fire alarm at a talk given by Rebel Media founder Ezra Levant at the University of Toronto last year. More recently, Daniel Robitaille, one of the lawyers who defended Guillaume Gomeshi, canceled a guest lecture at Wilfrid Laurier University, citing safety concerns after students vowed to protest her presentation. They said her presence on campus could potentially traumatize victims of sexual assault. Professional victim mentality. Like I say, it's all about divvying people up into groups and painting them into victims. And if you think of yourself as a victim, yeah, the underlying psychology on that, dangerous, very dangerous. U of T psychology professor Jordan Peterson knows what it's like to have campus events disrupted. His rallies are frequently the target of protesters to his views on free speech. Peterson regularly speaks out against Federal Bill C-16, which would make it illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender identity or expression. Peterson sees the legislation as a threat to free speech because it would force him to address people by their preferred gender pronouns. So for clarification, it's forced or compelled speech, right? At this stage of the game and why Jordan Peterson's standing up, it's not just that he's already in opposition to any silencing or any quelling of free speech, but this stepped it up a level even higher, which is why he felt compelled to speak out, is because it's not just a matter of freedom of speech. Now it's this legislation compels a certain particular kind of speech or language. When you're being compelled to use particular language, that steps outside of even the normal bounds of freedom of speech. Now it's compelled, right? Now it's using force for you to use words, and if you don't, you'll be punished, and the penalties will keep on going on. And like they even suggest, even if you start out where it's just a fine, well, if you refuse to pay that fine, the escalation continues right up to the point. And if you keep defending your rights or your freedoms, well, it could ultimately, the ultimate end consequence could be your death or being sent to prison, locked up in a cage for an indefinite period of time. That's how important, that's how much, that's why we have to stand in complete opposition to this bullshit. And Jordan Peterson understands this stuff instinctively because he's been a professor in these in the universities for a long time in his adult life. He's seen the gradual creep of this cultural Marxism, of this postmodernism, of this forced collectivism and forced subjugation. Thank goodness there's people like him. There are professors like him that are willing to even put their own jobs on the line to stand up. It's the first time I've seen in our legislative history where people are attempting to make us speak their language, Peterson said at a rally at U of T in October. Free speech versus hate speech. Let me just offer my own opinion on the free speech versus hate speech. First of all, there should not be, and unfortunately in Canada there is, the US there's no such thing. In Canada we do have a clause that criminalizes hate speech. But hate speech is a bullshit term. There's no such, there's hate behind it or ill feelings or anger, it's not the same as criminalize someone, and that gets covered a little further down in this article. But you need to understand that, to me, there's no such thing as hate speech, and there should be no limits on free speech, except for the very few exceptions, and we all should understand this instinctively. Is, yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, right? Because you could cause a lot of harm and pain, maybe deaths as a result, or threaten someone directly with violence with an actual intent to carry out that violence. Those are about the only times that there should be any limits on free speech. When there's an actual direct causation or correlation to physical violence happening to other people. Cassandra Williams was at the rally and says some of Peterson's supporters were being blatantly transphobic. One student took to the microphone and went on a rant against transgender people, calling them mentally ill and unloved. There's nothing hateful about that. That's what the person may very well believe, that a lot of the trans people do experience. Maybe they heard transgender people suggest as such, right? Williams herself is transgender and says free speech is being used as a dog whistle to give a legitimate platform to hateful messages. But look at someone like Blair White, and there's others that are transgenders too that would completely disagree with this, he or she, this particular transgender person. It's just a lie, really, to claim that some of these things are free and like genuine debates, adding there is no obligation to consider someone's opinion if it is hateful or discriminatory. Free speech advocates label people like Williams the intolerant left, students who refuse to expose themselves to ideas that come up against their personal beliefs. But Williams says creating spaces where some ideas of speech are not tolerated is a way for oppressed groups to push back. I think that's really funny, because the people who are being painted as snowflakes are quite often people who have struggled immensely in their lives, she said. They are people who have experienced extreme marginalization and oppression, and they are people who are the most susceptible to violence of anyone in our society. Oh, really? So there's I don't hear about a big push for violence against transgender people or LGBTQ or any of them. So that's complete fucking bullshit. It's not like these people are suffering a tremendous amount of violence because of who they are. Maybe if they're fucking assholes or bitches or whatever, just like with anybody, no matter how you identify sexually or as far as gender goes, if you're a fucking idiot, yeah, people are probably going to hate you and probably going to have ill intents and ill feelings towards you. Shouldn't have nothing to do with your gender. Lawyer John Carpe says the criminal code covers them just as it covers everyone else. Here we go. Universities should provide a safe space from assault, from physical harm, but not a safe space from feeling upset about ideas you disagree with, he said. If you're calling for any person or group of people to be murdered or to have their houses burned down or to be robbed or assaulted, that's already illegal criminal speech. So there's already a healthy boundary there. Like I said, yes, there's already laws in the book that have been there forever. If you solicit or use speech as a means to create violence, just as this person has suggested, but it has to lead to real physical violence. Without that causation, without that cause and effect correlation, it's just speech. It's just speech. We got to keep that front and center all the time when we're talking about speech. Hate speech, that's bullshit pretense already. I reject that, and we should all reject that completely and outright. And the only limit on free speech is, once again, if there's that direct causation or correlation of using actual physical violence towards another person. That's it. That's it. The Americans understand that perfectly. Canada, the UK, yeah, we have limitations on our freedom of speech, but you know what? That limitation only happens if you allow them to limit your free speech. I personally, they don't limit my free speech. I say what I have to say. And I'm willing to own up and accept any consequences or ramification for doing so. But I don't care, because I know what I do. I know what I do is moral. I know what I do is right. I know it's just. I don't look to seek to use any of my speech to cause any harm or violence to other people. So I am completely free and willing and feel no guilt for speaking out against this kind of bullshit. Neither does Jordan Peterson, and neither should you. Now, I'll share a link to this article in the video below so you can finish out and read it. It's not a whole lot left in it, but I think I've covered the most pertinent parts of this topic in this article. This is the Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.